tens of thousands of pounds per week to China, and that went to almost zero.
Live Canadian lobsters are on the move, destined for Asia in volumes no one has seen before.
The U.S. lobster business has entered its darkest time. A complete downfall after Canada strongly refused all American shipments. What used to be a sign of American pride now rots on the docks while Canadian boats take over the world's markets. It's a moment of betrayal, humiliation, and the downfall of an industry built by generations.
It's hard to stand up here and not be frustrated with what's been going on.
High trade tariffs, low bait shortages, new regulation.
Lobsters rotted on Maine docks, while across the border, Canadian shipments soared to global markets. For generations, America had prided itself as the queen of the seas. Yet suddenly, its lobster industry was collapsing. The haunting question was clear. How did a once mighty trade that fed the world unravel so quickly? The truth wasn't hiding under the waves. It was, made in politics, in taxes on goods, and in shady trade talks. Once upon a time, the US and Canada were like sea brothers, fishing the same Atlantic waters, serving the same buyers, and moving at the same coastal beat. But when Washington's trade fight with Beijing blew up, lobsters became a weapon worth billions, not steel, not oil, a creature with claws, suddenly burdened with the weight of a global struggle. There are other places where countries like China can get their seafood from. And the more they develop those markets, the less they'll need ours once. Canada acted fast. In just the first half of 2019, their lobster exports to China went up by 40%. Buyers in Shanghai and Guangzhou switched their orders almost overnight. While Canadian lobsters were being served at fancy Chinese feasts, Maine's catch just piled up in warehouses with nowhere to go. Shipments from the US just stopped moving, and the money lost just kept getting bigger. The real hit came from Europe. Canada made a super smart move. They got the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, with the European Union. This one agreement gave Canadian lobsters a free pass, meaning no taxes. Zero taxes. A clear path to the fancy seafood markets in Paris, Madrid, and Rome. Meanwhile, US lobsters, especially those from Maine, got hit with taxes of up to 8%. It might seem small, but when you're talking about millions of euros in big sales, that little bit extra was just terrible. European chefs, wholesalers, and distributors quickly did the math. Why pay more for the same lobster when Canada delivered it cheaper, fresher, and tax-free? And they didn't just place one-time orders. They signed long-term contracts. French restaurants that once championed Maine lobster switched to Canadian supply without hesitation. German wholesalers who used to split orders between Boston and Halifax abandoned Boston completely. Almost overnight, Maine lost the European market. Canada didn't just get a bigger slice, they took the whole pie. Boats from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick became the top choice, fully booked months in advance. Maine fishermen could only watch their industry fall apart, right before their eyes, powerless to do anything. Lobster fishing in Maine was never just an industry. It wasn't a shop you could close at the end of the day. It was identity. It was lineage. It was family. But tradition can't pay the bills when politics strip your markets. Suddenly, the pride, the traps, the hard-won knowledge, and the sleepless nights on stormy waters were worth less than ever. Generations who built their lives on lobster watched their legacy crumble. Not because the ocean had failed them, not because the lobsters had disappeared, but because Canada had beaten the United States on paper. Maine lobstermen did not feel defeated on the water. They felt ambushed in the halls of trade. The thing is, the lobsters aren't doing so great right now. When the price dropped, well, everything started to feel a little heavier for everyone. The emotional cost was awful. Fishermen grumbled that Canada wasn't winning by being better at fishing. They were winning by being smart. And they weren't wrong. Canadian lobsters weren't bigger, better, or caught with more effort. What Canada had were the right signatures on the right business deals. That, all by itself, was enough to turn the whole industry upside down. Local economies fell apart. The once busy lobster towns, full of tourists, seafood shacks, and steady paychecks, now faced quiet docks and unsold crates. While Maine struggled to stay afloat, Canada was busy carving up Asia as if it were theirs for the taking. After getting Europe on board with CETA, they doubled down by joining the huge Pacific trade deal, opening special doors to Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, and more. For Canada, This wasn't just another trade deal. It was a golden ticket. Because in Asia, lobster isn't just food. It's about status. It's a fancy gift for weddings, a sign of wealth and respect. In Tokyo, Beijing, or Ho Chi Minh City, lobster isn't a meal. It's a statement. And Canada totally got that. Friends, we probably have a trade worth about 7.5. While US lobsters kept hitting roadblocks with extra taxes, Canadian lobsters were getting into Asia without any extra fees, like they had a special pass. Hotels, restaurants, and big stores were quick to buy them up. Soon, every big party in Asia was showing off Canadian lobster, while the fishing gear in Maine just sat there gathering dust. In 2023, the numbers spoke louder than words. Canada had a huge 76% share of the live lobster market in China. The United States, only 25%. Most of our lobsters throughout the year are sent to China. That's because in China, these are considered a delicacy and they're willing to pay a premium price. Particularly for the Asian market, they want a perfect lobster. Think about it. The United States, once the undisputed king of lobster, was reduced to holding only a quarter of the market in the world's largest seafood buying nation. Maine's lobster fishermen watched helplessly as China, the fastest growing luxury market on earth, slipped through their fingers. Then came the punch to the gut, the numbers. Cold. Unforgiving. In 2021, Canada's lobster exports had shot up to $3.26 billion. This wasn't just some side market. It made up 37% of their entire seafood export business. Lobster had become Canada's crown jewel. Across the border, the United States was struggling with just $459 million, not even $500 million. A tiny fraction compared to Canada's huge empire. The fishermen in Maine didn't need reports or numbers to tell them what this meant. They lived it. Every time they pulled up their traps, only to find that the buyers weren't there. I can't think of one thing the National Marine Fisheries Service has ever done. The cruelest part? It was never about taste. Nobody ever said Maine lobsters were worse. Ask any chef, and they'll tell you, Maine and Nova Scotia lobsters are almost impossible to tell apart. Both are amazing. Both are famous. But taste didn't decide what happened. Trade deals did. And Canada used those deals like weapons, while the United States went into the fight with no defense. So that's what happened. Maine lobster fishermen saw their heritage shrink, their markets disappear, and their culture fall apart. Canada turned lobster into a billion-dollar powerhouse, while across the border, the collapse was deeper than just losing money. It wasn't just about finances, it was about culture, it was about feelings, it was personal. Because when lobster is your life, losing it doesn't just take away your paycheck, it takes away who you are. The lobster industries in the United States and Canada are, really intertwined. Maine catches most of its lobsters in the summer and fall. Canadian fishermen bring in most of their lobsters in the winter and spring. This lets traders keep customers supplied all year long. When the lobster problem finally hit the news, politicians saw a chance. And well, nobody grabbed it faster than Donald Trump. He pretty much turned Maine into his own personal stage. But here's the twist. Despite all the big talk, the speeches, the show, nothing actually changed. Europe didn't drop its tariffs. Canada kept its deals. Maine's exports stayed low. What Trump delivered wasn't a market comeback. It was theater, symbolism. And symbolism might win votes, but it doesn't sell lobsters. When the trade fight started to get stuck, Washington changed its game plan. Instead of taxes and deals, they pulled out a new weapon, the green card. Suddenly, the lobster war became a whale war. US officials said Canadian fishing was putting the North Atlantic right whale in danger, a kind of whale so rare there are only about 350 left. On the surface, it sounded good, protecting whales, saving the ocean. But, critics saw right through it, calling it a hidden trade barrier, a way to punish Canada without saying tax. Ottawa hit back hard. They rebranded their lobster as eco-friendly and safe for whales. They weren't just selling seafood, they were selling ethics. Suddenly, the fight wasn't about taste or price, but about what was right. Canadian lobster was marketed as cleaner, greener, and better for the planet. Meanwhile, things were looking pretty bad in Maine. Families were barely making ends meet. That's when Senator Susan Collins stepped in, making sure there was an $80 million subsidy package just to keep the lobster fishermen afloat. And that's how a once proud, self-sufficient industry ended up tangled in politics, promises, and bailouts, while Canada sailed off with the market. Go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel for more updates.